This was yesterday's oil pastel adventure. Strange things. They're really, for me, it's a proper workout. Observation, wrestling with the accuracy, implying just enough, that kind of stuff. This was the second one. That was the first, and that's the second. But they're very demanding, in a kind of forget everything way, and don't expect to get anything particularly. Don't expect full stop. I think that's the general approach to anything, but particularly with these, because you're just not gonna, you try and make a photographic kind of, or a more traditional feeling about it, and you haven't got I don't have small brushes, but I can still get a fair, sort of accuracy to what I do. But with these things, it's like you were painting with a blunt instrument. It's literally, and forget about accuracy of a point, or that you're meant to make the mark where you're meant to make the mark. They're just a bit, it's very haphazard, and you've got to balance that with, if you look at some people who really like the Toulouse-Lautrec kind of portraits, pastels, there's a lot of other work goes on. There's a lot of scratching out, there's all kinds of things, but it's a lot of it's just spotting things around. And I noticed when I was messing with the eyes or messing with the end of the nose, spotting, or the ear, spotting colors to actually impact on other things rather than trying to draw a definite edge. Anyway, that was yesterday's game. So back on the charcoal, thank goodness, needs no thinking about. And two things happened this morning. There was a guy popped up on I'm going to draw this lady. So a guy, it's the same lady but with her hair up, and up pops this amazing artist, right? And it's incredible, contorted almost models, but incredibly accurate, But I was looking at it, I think, yeah, and then it showed him photographing the model in a contorted way, and compositions of arms and legs, and basically, and I showed him photographing. I thought, yeah, I think he projects on it and then colours it in. So his colouring in is amazing. He's really good at colouring in, and then up pops this question about on one of these groups that says about the tracing thing. Now, I've got no problem tracing. I think that I don't have a problem with projection either. I think it's a means to an end. I think particularly if you decided that copying things, reality is the way that this works, then I think you've got to. I think, well, I almost said to you, I think you've got to trace, because you've got to trace and you've got to project. Because that's you don't want to get bogged down with freehand drawing and then trying to get it accurate. Because people do that. I've seen them do that. They're hyper realistic outcomes, or they expect a hyper realistic outcome, and they freehand to start with. That's a job, that is. I wouldn't bother. I would trace it. I'd definitely trace it. But as I said in that video the other day about cheating, people call it cheating, and then there was people kicking off about people being snobs because they're referring to tracing as cheating and things, and it just makes me smile that these people are just as much a snob, because they're saying it's not cheating, and it's, I don't know, it's just a bit crazy, really. But the thing for me is the you're missing out on the tracing. I mean, I traced all the time with illustrations, and because you just wanted a definite finished outcome, but you're missing out on the growth thing, the growth of your observational skills, and that, I think, is the thing. Even if you're good at colouring in, you're going to have to learn to see to a certain level, not necessarily responsive seeing, because that's a different thing. So this is responsive seeing, right? So it's driven by how I feel about the subject, and I'm responding to what I see, and that's responsive observation and drawing. Whereas good at colouring in is direct response, it's direct observation. So you're literally looking at every detail and it's very direct, and ultimately then it becomes an accurate copy. But the observational stuff, the responsive stuff is where all it goes through the cogs, in your brain. It goes through and it goes mishmash, and it comes out in your way. It comes out the way you feel about the subject, the way you see the world. That's what happens if it's responsive. You know it yourself. I mean, you meet somebody, you respond to somebody in a different way. Somebody else responds to that person because your cogs work in different ways. So if you're observing something and responding to it creatively, then no doubt it's going to be unique to you. It has to be unique to you, and that's why it can't really be an exact copy, because that's not unique to you. Because anybody else could make an exact copy. I've just seen somebody this morning that been on one of these airbrush courses, and they learned to draw this face with a beard, and every wisp in the hair, every hair in the beard was drawn and all that, just like everybody else on the course. It's like, and what is it trying to prove? And then another statement pops up and says that an artist that ceases to try to impress the world becomes difficult to ignore. It's that kind of thing. So, and that's exactly what these airbrushing guys do. It's all about, look how great I am. In fact, when I had the goal to this one particular guy that's done this, that this person is bragging about how well they've copied this photograph, it was him, and his response to me was, just because you can't do it. You know what I mean? And that was great. I don't think anybody else really. I said to him, thanks for answering the question like that, or commenting like that, because it's exactly the kind of thing that you'd expect. I mean, little did you know that I was chucking an airbrush around before he was born, but that was by the by, but it's that kind of that's almost like an inverted snobbery. But that, when they're doing things like that, then I think it's inevitable that you're going to be tracing things. I don't see how you could do it any other way, to get such an accuracy. Again, saying with this guy that I looked at this morning, who was painting these contorted figures, there was no way that he would get that kind of detail. The accuracy of the placement of the limbs and all that, just and seeing the canvas before we started, there's obviously, when I always remember when you trace something at work in the studio when I was working in design, and you could see there was even a style of tracing, and then sometimes we just still leave the trace lines in. It became, and you look at any 70s illustrator, and you'll see the element of tracing to it. There's a kind of, the way you sort of just enough around the hands just to get the, what I mean. That was one of the things you always see, just a tick there and a tick there, and then the fingernail. You can see it, and this guy that did this super realistic things, you can see it on his preliminary sketches. Now, whether or not that was his original sketch, I doubt it. It's just too brief. It looks to me like it's definitely projected, but as I said, I've got no problem with that at all, because the end game for him is how well he can copy the details. But I still think that there has to be an element, and when people talk about, I want it to be a looser style, I've got friends who say that, and I want a looser style. but they're very meticulous in the way they draw, and it can take 3 or 4 weeks before they're ready to paint, you know, because they've done these incredible detailed drawings. Actually, this person I'm thinking of doesn't trace, so hats off to them. But then they basically make copies. So this person painstakingly copies, you know, draws a face, and then paints it. Personally, no, this comment about was there an app to do it was a watercolor thing, a watercolor group. And personally, for me, watercolors have to be the Sargent way. You know, if you look at, say, the Santa Maria del Solo, for instance, which is for me the all-time how watercolor should be. Not your Russell Flint type of stuff, which for me is just a bit cliche and a bit contrived and tried. I mean, I say contrived, but I was talking to somebody yesterday about Sargent, and I've gone off him really because of his contrivance. You know, I admire him and everything else, but you know, the Lily Rose contrivance thing, you know, growing the lilies and all that sort of stuff. I just think that, you know, trying to recreate a moment, I just think that I don't know. I think responding to the world is how I see art. I don't see it as manufacturing a world view. So that's probably what it is. You know, sort of creating an image he knows would sell, that kind of thing. I don't think he did it. I think he actually apparently he saw these girls when he was on a train and wanted to recreate it. So, which is fair enough, you know. But as I say, I'm a little bit off him now because of that. Which is like, I'm sure if he was alive, he'd be really concerned about that. But the you see how much easier charcoal is. If you're going to draw portraits, learn to draw with charcoal, because I tell you, there's just I am in a completely different zone when I'm doing this. I don't have to think. That's the main thing. And as somebody was saying about the pastels, it'd be interesting to see my thought process. And you know, there probably is a thought process for that. I know it's exhausting. That's the number one thing. So there must be some kind of cognitive engagement that just draining me. But this, no, I don't have to think at all with this. It's just pure response. And I think that probably is the reason why I'm drawn to charcoal so much, because it's not that it's effortless, because there is effort in it, but it's like it's not demanding. And one of the things that I remember being the significant revelation, I suppose, with charcoal was its natural propensity to create shading, you know, to create a level of dynamic or a tonal quality that, not dynamic, but it mimics tones very easily. So it was just that, and the fact that you could kind of almost do anything with charcoal, and it would have a certain quality about it. And as I say, I think that's probably one of the early recognitions that, oh my goodness, it looks so tonally so real already. I've not really made any effort with it. And you know, once you start pushing it around and touching it and blending it in a way, it does it readily, you know. So, but as I said, the tracing thing, I've got no problems with that. I just think, somebody said on this group that which is right and wrong, but the first thing they said was that everybody missed the starting point. They said the starting point has to be pick your medium. I mean, that's like all right then, you know, taking a sword to a gunfight kind of thing. But it's a completely bad advice, that, by the way. It's terrible advice. I think that you've got to start anyway. You've got to start with, why am I doing this? What do I expect from it? And do I expect anything from it? It's that you've got to start there. If you don't start at a place where you outline the journey to some extent, if there's no destination, that's probably the best place to start, because then you're not going to kill yourself over, oh, I must be this good, I must do it like this, I must be as good as so and so. You're not going to kill yourself doing all that rubbish. So you're probably going to, if you can start with no expectations, then that's a great place to start. But then choose a medium. If mediums are going to be a deciding factor, they shouldn't be, but choose a medium that's going to assist in your endeavors rather than getting in the way. Do not use oil pastels, because they're going to, and the only reason you'd use oil pastels, and I've got somebody that's connected with me, and she does these sort of 1930s postcard kind of, pretty scenes. They're sort of one step away from Studio Ghibli kind of stuff, that kind of vibe. And that's I'm pretty sure that's the style that they want to, have identified. I'm not sure it's a evolutionary arriving kind of thing, which is often the case. Styles are always a conclusion to something. They're not necessarily a decision in the first place. So, but some people do. People do make the decision in the first place. I want to draw like so and so, and fair enough. I mean, I've got a friend who was inspired by the game show, on the telly, the Sky Arts thing, and if that's what inspired him to do it, then that's great. There's a hole in that theory, though, because it then means that the standard, if you like, of their contestants' abilities is a little bit of a yardstick, and it can be, if you're not careful, the problem. But I think that, and I always say this, I know, but I think that the easiest route you can find is the best route. So if it is tracing, that can give you the results. Because a lot of people will do sort of painting by numbers, because it's like, they can get the feeling of being an artist and the outcome of being an artist without the effort. And if tracing does that, then trace. But as I said, find the shortest route. If tracing is the way to do it, then do that. Don't be swayed in any way, but equally don't think that if someone says to you, you're better off working freehand, don't think they're being snobby about that. They're just, all they're saying, like I say, is that you'll learn a lot more about creation if you're in control of particularly with portraits, if you're in control of the mark making, if you like, from the get-go. And somebody asked this morning about where do they start making portraits? Well, apart from getting your head right, because that's the only place to start, really, why you're doing it and everything else. Apart from that, you've got to recognize that it's a responsive thing. You respond to all art is responsive. If it's not, it's decorative. So, but you need to understand that it's your response to the world. How you see the world is what we're talking about. How you see a face is what we're talking about. How you see another human is what we're talking about. So, once that's established, the main thing, I suppose, is that your response will be embedded within the marks that you make. So if it's an emotional connection that you've made with the subject, you're likely to have different marks You know, you can see that when you know, the typical example is sort of aggressive images or moving images, and you know, you'll get more striking marks. You know what I mean? So the marks will embed or be embedded with the life that you respond to. So, as I said before, if you want life in a portrait, there has to be life in the marks that you make. Now, there's no life in the marks that we're tracing, none at all. And you may try, once you've traced it and once you've got it on the paper or whatever, you may try to put life in it. But I go back to, you know, Sargent's Venice stuff, or even the stuff in Mallorca, which I used to think was until yesterday. So at Christmas I got a Sargent book with his all his work from Spain, and so I'm thinking about those boats on the harbour. I think, oh, I thought it was Corfu. I'm pretty sure that he went to Corfu. There is a building that he painted, or yeah, it was watercolour in Corfu, and I thought the boats were from Corfu, but they were from Mallorca anyway. So if you look at those and you look at any of the Venice, you know, the Santa Maria del Salou thing, and you'll see the life in the marks that is, you know, it's there. It's just, and it's that, I think, more than anything else that sets him apart, because of the life in his marks. In terms of watercolor, I think that's probably the best example of what watercolor can do. And now these days it's all replication, you know, the photographic sort of outline colored in the Chinese top-down things that are just so photographic. The shine is just, it's too perfect, you know. So that straight away you think, oh well, that's not right, you know, because you know, there has to be mistakes in your work, and this is part again of the freehand thing. So the mistakes will define your work. They're not mistakes. They are if you're hell-bent on making copies of faces and for some reason you can't get the nose in the right place or whatever. So they are mistakes in those instances, but they're not, if you look at them in the right way, they're not. But this is, you know, again, one of those things. People are too locked into the idea that replicating faces, photographs in particular, is a portrait. And it's not. It's a copy of a photograph, and I don't know why people would think it was any different. It's not art. I mean, I'd struggle to call drawings art, but let alone copies of photographs art. But people do consider these immaculate blended photocopies as art, which is fair enough, each their own. But for me, it isn't. So. Because it's just too perfect. You know, the more perfect it becomes, the less art it is, or the less art that's in it for me. And so I'm not really. I said this to somebody yesterday. We had this conversation. I said the problem is that anybody comes to what I do, and I contradict everything, and so consequently, I don't get, as you can tell, I don't get many views. Because I'm not locked into tradition. I'm not saying it should be done this way. I don't care if you want to trace. I just care that you care. That's the thing, and that you understand why you should care about it, and then ask yourself the question: should I trace it? It depends, really, for me. As I said, if you're doing photographic level copying, then you have no choice but to trace it. And then what happens is, and this is one of the things that I find a little bit annoying. If it's not, the words are not annoying, but it just, I don't know, a bit pretentious, I suppose, is when they get these hyper realistic executions, and then they break it down. You know, they just put colours over it, or they sort of, you know, make a background, distressed background on it, and all that, as if it's some kind of attempt to make it seem more creative than it is. Everything that happens during the process of creation is what happens in the moment. You know, it's not a considered thing that happens at the end. Oh, it's not creative enough. I'm just going to smudge everything You know, I'm going to put some blue lines across it, or I'm going to use a ruler to do this kind of thing. All of that is suddenly you're getting in, you've learned how to copy a photograph really well, and then you get into the realms of decoration. And I don't know, when I see great art that's full of life, regardless of its technical skill, technical execution, it just moves me because it's honest and it's not pretending to be anything. It's not trying to be fine art. It's not trying to be super creative by putting blue lines all over everything. It's just somebody's response, creative response. I don't think it's a thing that you've got to consider, and I don't think it's something you've got to contrive. I just think it happens. This is the thing. I just think creativity happens. It doesn't come to order. That's one of the main things I learned as a designer. It doesn't. You can't turn it on and off like a tap. But it just happens, and that's, you've got to be. What's he say? What's the man say? You got to read the Art Spirit when he said something about you can't contrive to be creative. You just got to be in a place where it's inevitable, you know. So, or to create art. I think you're referring to creating art, but that's it. I'd rather say being creative. But you just got to be in a place where it's inevitable that you'll create, you know. And whatever, however you get in that place. By the way, that's not necessarily something that you can contrive either. I think a mental state is what he was referring to put yourself in a mental state where being creative is inevitable. Charcoal is wonderful stuff. It does not get in the way of your response at all. It doesn't ask me to consider before I try and make, and then I try and make the mark, and it just doesn't do it, you know. And then you just faffing around trying to keep the spontaneity. This is the thing. You're trying to keep the spontaneity with the oil pastels of the marks that you first laid down, but they're not quite in the right place. So you're going to have to move them around a bit. And when you do that, the spontaneity goes. It looks overworked. You know, there is a guy on, I can't remember, it begins with G anyway, and he kind of does the oil soft pastel thing, and his approach is whatever happens. There's a little bit of design in it, you know, sort of creative design type of thing, but it's very much like, if it's not quite right, if the eyes aren't looking proper or whatever, he leaves it. And I like, in a kind of an abstract kind of way, you know, I like that. Begins with a G, and he does a course as well on doing these things. Really good. So, nice to get back onto the charcoal, to be fair. Not least of all because it's quick, you know. It's not something that you need to spend hours to get results, you know. Plus the fact there's because this is another thing about the freehand thing as well. The freehand thing for me is it's not just the marks that are in the right place. It's the marks that build up to the marks that are in the right place as well. So if there's you know, lines, ancillary lines around things that seem to be, well, they just seem to be wrong and they shouldn't be there, and people are rubbing them and all the rest of it. But for me, those are the lines that led to the right lines. And in a way, they may be wrong, but they're right because they are the lines that, you know, they're the scaffolding, if you like. They're the history of the accuracy. To get to where it was accurate, I did all these other things. I mean, there are things that I will fix, but as much as I can, I tend to leave the initial marks in. But that's I think that's just a personal choice. I don't think it's something I'd recommend. It's just because it just suits me. I just like the way it looks, I suppose. It just feels right. You kind of get that with the pastels, but and with other things as well. One of the things about the watercolor thing, you know, when you look at, say, the Santa Maria della Solo, you'll see that there are lines in there and marks in there that shouldn't really be there, and that is again the same, you know, the same kind of thing. Is it's part of the evolution of the painting. So. So I'm probably going to put some background onto it, only because it'll just gives it a bit more lift. And what's happening up here is there is a highlight in the hair at the top there. I think 9 times out of 10 with this, when I put the backgrounds on them, it's more of a design thing than anything else. You know, it just feels like it's giving the thing a bit more context. I might have to swap that for a piece that's a bit better. I was worried I swapped the charcoal over because of the colour changes. So I'll try not to, if I can, I'll try not to change. I think also that one of the things that I'd say about the tracing versus freehand thing is that, particularly with charcoal, is that you can do just about anything, and I wouldn't say get away with it, but it's got like a freedom about it, I suppose, which is why it's called freehand, I suppose. But it's definitely something that, providing you're not frightened of it. There's the other thing as well, is that if you're trying to make accurate drawings and trying to do it freehand, there will always be a little bit of a fear of it getting it wrong, and you've got to get past that. You've got to get past that in order to do freehand, to drawing freehand. If you're always frightened of making it wrong, then trace is probably the route you want to go. Because it's not, freehand is many things. A friend of mine who does incredible charcoal portraits, and they are photographic, but he works freehand. But it's built on proper engineering, mechanicking. You know, I don't think it's luminous, but there's definitely some underlying mechanics that's going on, so it can engineer the accuracy. So that's probably something you need to learn as well. And it's not gritting or anything like that. It's just good at what it does, and he spent many years learning how to do it. So but that's one of the the other sides to it. And I personally don't like it to be that deliberate. I think that if if it's got things wrong with it and everything else, I don't care. I don't really. I think as I said before, the mistakes are probably what define it for me. I think that as soon as you try to eliminate the mistakes and make it all perfect, then you're gonna scare away the good stuff. One of the things as well about backgrounds is that you've got a belonging aspect to it. Does this character, this face, belong to the background? And somebody said about I want to get into portraits. Another one of the comments this morning, I want to get into portraits. Always work from life. You get a sense of 3D. so that's a good one, isn't it? That and some of the stuff that these people come out with, and you look at the work and think they're completely clueless. There's no wonder the work's crap. but it's like that's one of the never think in 3 dimensions. Well, how complicated is that? To think and draw in 3 dimensions. It's like, no, you just draw what you see. And if it's the way the light hits things and the way it relates to things, and that's what you want to be doing. You don't want to be, oh, this is a sphere, therefore I must do this. This is how a light hits the sphere. Who cares? Who cares about stuff like that? It's just like, these are memes that people put out, and it's absorbed amongst the artist wannabes, and they keep perpetuating it, and then they get in these groups and say things like that. Always work from life, because it's the 3 dimensions. The only reason you work from life, and the real reason, is because you start in front of a real human being, and you should pick up on their essence better when they're alive in front of you. And that people don't talk about that, but that's the most important thing. You're telling me that when these masters got their models sat in front of them, that it wasn't a literal conversation as well as a visual conversation, because it was, and that's what propelled their greatness, to get to know their subject, in an emotional sense. What you've been doing today? How did you get to work? And how did you get here? And how did you got kids? How's the kids? It's just, and the moment you understand that person is the moment that your portraits improve. And as I said before, this is the problem with working from photographs. But my technique of giving them names is a kind of a surefire way of, and it sounds daft, but give them a name of somebody and I guarantee that you'll make a better portrait. It's just how it works. Portrait artists are people who get on with other people. If you've got interpersonal skills, then you're probably a great portrait artist. That's how it is. Listen to these sort of things that the Tate do when they're talking to portrait artists. They're all great communicators and people persons, people, or whatever. But they are. That's the secret to it. If you're good with people, you're probably good. You will be good at making portraits, if that's the thing that you want to do. Anyway, it's getting there, isn't it? I think the problem is with this is that we got this huge amount of light on this, which is now starting to deplete, as you can see. But that was the problem with it, as it comes down here. One of the things that with charcoal as well. So this is a big difference between charcoal and working with the pastels. Admittedly, I did something similar on the coat on that blue woman, but I put charcoal on in some way to indicate where there is, tonal difference, light difference, and then smudge it. Not always, but I will smudge it in order to create the tonal effect. But you can't really do that with pastels, with oil pastels. We can't smudge it, so it's not something that you can consider doing. But that's, as I say, that's one of the things when I'm drawing and I can see that there's a tonal issue and I want to adjust the tone. There's two things that I rely on. Is A, that the charcoal makes a mark without any effort, so it needs to drift across the surface and still make a mark. And the other one is that I'm going to create a tonal level, a tonal value, and then I'm going to do something with it. Not often, I mean, not always, rather. I do sometimes just leave it. I'll just leave that. You'll see sometimes I just leave lines on it. But that's you can see how much better it is now. But that's one of the, or two of the things that I need the charcoal to do. And because it's so easy to do this stuff, it's so easy to adjust the charcoal, the values. It's another reason why charcoal's a great tool to work with. But seeing the things, observing that those tonal changes are happening is one of the things that I think freehand brings. It doesn't. It might. You'll still see if you're colouring in. If you've got an outline which you're colouring in, but I don't think you'll appreciate it, if you like, as much as if you were working freehand, because one of the things, and that this is back to the oil pastels again, one of the things is that there's a compromise with the oil pastels, and when you're drawing with charcoal, one of the drawing full stop, one of the things you need to do, whether it's a portrait or a landscape, is that there are certain things that are important in the image, the subject. So you have to be able to differentiate between the things that matter and the things that don't. And working with a traced image, which is then going to be coloured in, everything matters until you decide it's not, and that's your way of bringing some creativity back into it. But if you look at, say, something like a Sargent portrait or many other, Zorn even, or even the Sorolla, they've already decided what's important and what isn't. This is the thing about working from other people's work. They've decided what's important and what isn't. It's not down to you. You're just going to copy what they do. So that's not helping at all, is it? Even if people say, "Oh, I want to understand the way they paint," well, that's not. The way they paint is a result of the way they think about what they're doing. Their approach. And that's it's not a technical thing that they've learned to know. I'm going to apply this to. It's somebody was talking about the hyperrealism thing and saying that somebody said, "Oh, anybody could take a photograph," because it did look like a photograph, and they said, "Yeah, but there's no skill in that." I mean, you're talking about snobbery. That's snobbery right there. This is it's ignorance and snobbery, which is usually the same thing for a lot of people. But skill. So skill was the reason why this hyper-realistic image was great. It's because it was skillful, and you should never think that skill is art. It's not. It's the reason you create art, or it's the means to create art, and often it's a reason not to, because you think you're not skilled enough. So you've got to be careful with that. Oh, I'm going to learn all these skills, and therefore I'll be really good at it. Thing. It's a route, if you know what I mean. It's a route that you choose. It may well be a difficult route, because you have to, if you say doing hyperrealism, you've got to learn so many things. And to some, that's all they want to do anyway. So fair enough. Let's just go for it. I think from a creative point of view, I think I'd always advise people to draw freehand, however bad they think they are at drawing. I don't think anybody's bad at drawing. I just think they think they're bad at drawing. It's that thing about, it's not that you can't draw. It's the fact that you think you have to do it like somebody else, and you have to have the same outcome as somebody else. So forget that bit, and all of a sudden we can all draw, can't we? You could draw as a child. What was wrong with that? Apart from your parents telling you it didn't look like a cow. I've said that many times, but that was the problem. The adults knew nothing about art, but decided to ruin your life and tell you couldn't draw because the cows that you drew didn't look like cows. So how many people suffered that? It's remarkable though. There is I feel no exhaustion or anything with this. I got this far with the oils, and I'm really exhausted. And I think I spent about 3 hours on that one yesterday. And at the end of it, I can go and have a lie down. It's mad, isn't it? It's mad. I once saw somebody talking about, it was a monk, I think, that said this thing about it was illuminating the Bible or whatever, just illuminating the text, and said how exhausting it was, even though he'd never moved from the spot, and he just sat there meticulously, colouring in and applying gold and painting gold and whatever, and he was absolutely exhausted by it, and I understand that. I mean, this is probably why I think charcoal is so good for me, is that I don't feel any kind of effort, or it doesn't feel like I'm out of breath doing it. Not that I think I'd ever get out of breath doing it, but you know what I mean. It doesn't feel like it's a chore to do it, and the results are as you can see, acceptable. Well, talking about the doing thing, the freehand, because you can make decisions. The things like they say here, I've decided that this is not that important. I'm trying to get it something like, but I've decided that it's not that important, that it's meticulously drawn. And I can get away with that, because it's not, this is what's important. I've decided this is important, not this. So that's the kind of thing you can do when you're working freehand. As I said, with the traced images, everything's important, because the job at hand is to colour it in, and the more detailed the colouring in, often the better it is considered. Which is the problem, really. But doing this, I think that one of the things I just thinking about it then when I was drawing the girl yesterday was, getting things in the right place thing is a real for a lot of people is the real enemy, and that one thing can stop people from even attempting, because they don't think they can get them in the right place. It's a relationship with shapes. It's all shapes, and it's how far those shapes are apart and what size they are in relation to each other, and it's all of that. That's really what it's about. But people think, in the comments to this woman that wanted, where do I start with portraits? One of them was draw lots of noses and eyes and mouths, which is again really bad advice. Draw lots of shapes and tone, I suppose. If you want to do that, my advice would be just draw faces. Just draw faces, and don't think of them as noses and eyes and everything else. Just think of them as shapes and tone. But but if you're talking about just the practical stuff, I mean, the real thing is your mental state, mental attitude towards doing it. That's the thing you need to resolve before you start. But I'm just about done with this, I think, apart from tickling there and there, but yeah. As I said, to me, this is my my wheelhouse. I watched the thing the other night about FBI, was it, or something like that, and they were talking about it was in their wheelhouse. What the hell's that mean? But yeah, this is my wheelhouse. This is where I feel most at home, I think. Now, I don't know whether or not that's to do with the number that I've done. But I do know when I started making portraits in charcoal that it was immediate. You know, my response to it was immediate. Now, I don't know if that's an indicator. I don't know. If you know, so you've got a natural talent for something. But my son, a trumpet at Christmas, we all had a blow on it, and we could only make a windy noise. He picked it up, and he got a note out of it straight away. I think that's probably might be my thing with charcoal. Although for me it's drawing, and I could do this with graphite just the same. But I like to work at a size, and I also like it to be quick. Working with graphite at this size, I'm only just drawing the ear. You know what I mean? Because they're too small. So that was one thing I would say. And the guy talking about choose a medium, I would say, choose a medium that is appropriate. If you're learning to draw, for instance, get something thick and ugly, and a real small piece of paper, and learn to see only what matters, because you can only draw what matters. That's how you do it, and I guarantee you rapidly learn to draw. There's nothing more, because that's how I learned. That's how I learned when I went into the studios. That's what they did to me. They gave me a little sketchbook and a big fat marker and said, draw with that. So you just learn to draw what's important. Right. Yeah, just about there. Sort out the forehead a little bit, deal with this highlight that's there, but it's just about there, I think. Yeah, so I'll probably do a few of these today. So now that I'm back on the charcoal, and I'll catch you later.